By now you've probably heard the news. It was pretty big last week, and I'm certain in the weeks to come, it's only going to get bigger. But we got to take a deep analysis into this, because, well, it requires careful consideration. You know, a lot has been said recently about democracy. And, you know, how close we are to losing it. And sometimes in politics there's a lot of hyperbole. You know, people say things and, well, it's advantageous to, well, themselves firstly, and then their political party. That's the nature of the beast. That's politics. But seldom do politicians really talk about democracy and what democracy really means and what it is. It's very seldom. So when you start hearing talk of democracy, you know that something's up. Something's afoot, so to speak. Now, last week, the Justice Department in this country charged the founder of the Oathkeepers with a seditious attempt to overthrow the nation's government. Now, this is no small potatoes, because you first got to know the characters, the players in the game, so to speak. This is why when we heard this news, we knew it was huge, so to speak. You got to rewind and take back a number of years, all the way back to 2008. I know, that's a long time to go back to. Can you even remember 2008? Most people probably can't. They're like, something noteworthy happened. I remember that much, but I don't remember exactly what it was. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and non-binary individuals, let me give you a reminder, so to speak. In 2008, we didn't have very much social media. I don't even know if Facebook was around in 2008. I don't think they were invented yet. If they were in beta testing. It was like maybe a couple of universities, prestigious universities like Harvard and Yale and Princeton. They might have been using something remotely like that. You had maybe MySpace. That kind of ancient, prehistoric website and internet. But you had something else happen. You had, well, the historical candidacy of the first African American to run for the presidency and win. It happened at the tail end of 2008. We all remember his name because, well, at the time people couldn't even pronounce it. And now it's very common to pronounce. We had the election of Barack Obama take place. And, well, as a nation, we all felt good that we had elected the first black president of this country. Apparently that wasn't the case. We all didn't feel good, even though the media presented that image. I want to just critique it, because that's kind of was fake news. It wasn't the sentiment of everyone in this country. It might have been the sentiment of the majority in this country, but there was a vocal minority who couldn't stand it and had to try to delegitimize it. And boy, did they look for ways to delegitimize it. The first way they said was, well, let's go to the name itself. It's an Arabic sounding name, a Muslim sounding name. And so we had the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. And the dude that, well, they said plotted that, Saddam Hussein, we invaded Iraq. And well, it just so happens that Barack Obama's middle name is Hussein. And you know that the extremists in our country, the racists in our country, back then, they were being openly extremists and racist too. And that's where the Oathkeepers come into play. You see, you're just now hearing about the seditious charge in 2022. But the Oathkeepers were formed in March of 2009. Exactly, now let's do some basic math here. The election happens in November of 2008. Barack Obama is elected president. The inauguration doesn't happen to January. So you got January, February, and March of 2009. So literally Barack Obama hasn't been in office for 90 days. And you have a huge militia, an anti-government militia by its own accord, pops up out of nowhere because they're upset about the election of the first African-American president, Barack Obama. And now this militia, he doesn't like the government anymore. Even though the founder, Stewart Rhodes, is a former government employee, multiple times worked with the government. He was in the Air Force as a paratrooper, working with the United States government. He worked in Washington, D.C. as a legislative aide for former Congressman Ron Paul, the government again. So at multiple times in his life, he's drawn a paycheck from the United States government. And in March of 2009, all of a sudden, the United States government is the enemy of humanity. What happened in November of 2008? Barack Obama gets elected president. And not only that, he tells the members, once he forms this group, to prepare for civil war in this country. In 2009, prepare for war. But you go and you look at the organization, the Oathkeepers, and they say in the bylaws that you can't discriminate on the basis of race. Now keep that in mind, because that's going to become very important shortly. Now, maybe you're upset because you don't agree with Barack Obama's policies. That's legitimate. We'll give you that. Maybe it has nothing to do with his race. But when George Bush was president, did they issue any edicts about preparing for war? No. Nothing that we can find. Bill Clinton is president. Any edicts about preparing for war? Sure, you had some splinter groups and anti-government people. But Stewart Rhodes didn't invent the Oathkeepers, during Bill Clinton's presidency. So in March of 2009, less than 90 days after the first black president gets elected in this country, and it's time to prepare for another civil war. But it has nothing to do with race, I tell you, according to their bylaws. You gotta make that make sense, though, because there's more. Usually where there's smoke, there's plenty of fire. And oh, there's plenty of fire here. They have members. And one of their chief proponents back when this thing is first getting set up is a man by the name of Charles Dyer. He's a Marine veteran. And he's all over YouTube. They might have scrubbed the videos now. You never know. But I hope they leave that shit up. Because the American people, when the January 6th committee starts holding public hearings, it's going to be important to have the full context of who these insane lunatics are completely. So some things you have to leave up for historical purposes. I hope they leave up those videos of Charles Dyer. Frightening to even have watched that insanity. But anyway, Charles Dyer was a huge proponent of the Oathkeepers. He was a member of the Oathkeepers. Very high up there in their membership. Maybe even second in command to Stewart Rhodes. We don't know the command structure per se. But he was high up there as a lieutenant, at the least, for minimum. And it just so happened that Charles Dyer, you know, these people, if you're an extreme racist, you're not likely to be a good person. So Charles Dyer was indicted for child molestation of his own daughter, who he raped, his 7-year-old daughter. And the Oathkeepers knew about all of this shit. And they let him stay in. And it wasn't only until the indictment that, well, they decided to part ways with him. But Dyer made a lot of anti-Obama videos, you know, referring to the president of the United States at that time as the illegal alien occupying the White House. You know who else was making conspiracy statements and demands at that time? A little bit later on, down the road, Donald J. Trump. You remember he started a conspiracy called birtherism. And that was what the Oathkeepers latched on to. That Barack Obama was illegitimate because he wasn't born in this country. He was born in Kenya. And he was a secret Muslim agent sent to destabilize America. That was what the Oathkeepers, that was what drew thousands of people to register as Oathkeepers in this country. You know, estimates range between 1,000 to 38,000 members of the Oathkeepers. A lot of people got into that in this country that didn't support Barack Obama. And there were millions of people who voted against Barack Obama. So to have 38,000 people out of millions of people who voted against you become extremists and they test your guts. That's not like that's a huge number. That's a very tiny actual percentage. We're talking decimals. So I don't want people to think, oh, well, how could this happen in America? Kind of thing. 38,000 people. But you got to think about what the membership requirements are for the Oathkeepers. It's very selective. You have to be in law enforcement, in military, either retired or active for law enforcement and military. Retired or active for first responders, EMT workers, sheriffs, and other types of first responders, perhaps nurses, doctors. We know that there's legislators, politicians who are Oathkeeper members all across America. Now, one of the hallmarks of our country is associations, memberships, clubs, groups. And you have a constitutional right to, well, be a member or join an organization of anything in your country. You're protected in your country by freedom of expression, First Amendment. So it's nothing inherently wrong with the Oathkeepers, except for, well, what their oath is. You see, they don't tell you what the oath that they're keeping is. Your organization is titled Oathkeepers. How come we don't know what the oath is? They say they took an oath to uphold the Constitution. Now this gets tricky. You gotta listen. Because if you blink, you'll miss it. They say they took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. How come you never hear anybody ask the question that I'm about to ask? Which Constitution did you take the oath to? They talk about the Constitution like there's one. It's been amended 20-something odd times. So there's more than one version. You see, I know which oath and which Constitution they took their oath to keep and protect. It's not the one after the Civil War. It's the one prior to. Now, if that's the oath you took to uphold and keep, that would kind of be worthy to come out and tell the American citizenry, right? But see, you'll never hear that on your media. Now, that could be quite problematic. Let me explain why. We kind of fought a civil war about that situation and issue. And if your oath is to, well, the Constitution prior to it being amended, and other people's oath is to the Constitution as it currently stands, you can see where the issue might lie, so to speak. So you got to be very careful when people tell you they took an oath to something. We told you a long time ago. If you're like us, You bear no allegiance. The nation states get upset when we say that, as though that's a slight against the nation state. It's not a slight against the nation state at all. It's just that nations and pacts and contracts, terms and conditions often change. And if you take an oath at one point in time and it changes, and you don't like the changes in the terms and conditions, you can't say you're reneging on your oath you took. You gotta be very careful with oaths. Over the years, Stewart Rhodes and his rhetoric became more and more fringe. It was fringe to begin with. It was fringed in racism, hatred of, minorities. That was always there. And the original members knew about that. But what they didn't know was, the end game, so to speak. Rhodes talked about things like having to be protective over an infringing and shadowy figure looming over the government. Now, you gotta read into some of that as cold-worded language. When they say some shadowy, murky figure looming in the background, what do you think of when you hear the word shadow? Something dark and nefarious, correct? So it's a play on imagery and semantics with these individuals. It's tinged with racism is what I'm trying to tell you. Anyway, let's go back to Barack Obama. He's not legitimately president. He got elected. Nobody disputed that election. Nobody. At least that wasn't the way they disputed it. Remember, if he wasn't born in this country, he was illegitimate. Therefore, he shouldn't have been president. Because you have to be an American citizen in order to be president. And they're saying he wasn't an American citizen. Okay. So he's illegitimate. Not because he didn't win, but he wasn't even qualified to run. So Barack Obama is illegitimate. First black president. Let's fast forward to 2020. Donald Trump's re-election campaign. Now, Oathkeepers, they're strongly in favor of Donald Trump. They no longer have any problem with the government, in fact. So that's interesting too, because you're an anti-government militia. But when Donald Trump is elected president, you want the government. I'm going to tell you what Stewart Rhodes wanted Donald Trump to do in 2020. In 2020, Stewart Rhodes demands that Donald Trump declare a national insurrection because of Black Lives Matter protests in the wake of George Floyd and his lynching in this country. He wants Donald Trump to declare a national insurrection and utilize his militia in the streets of cities that they don't live in, armed to the teeth. And if they feel worthy, they can just shoot you as a protester because they've been declared as an armed militia to protect whatever they feel they need to protect. This kind of thing happens in a lot of countries. That's not something that's, generally not done in countries. Go and read the history of Colombia and much of Latin America. That's why Latin America has had so much issues in terms of economic stability, because of cultural and civil unrest between right-wing extremist fractions and left-wing extremist fractions fighting amongst each other as citizens because, well, they disagree about the outcomes of elections. Nobody trusts the electoral system. That's how you get instability. And generally speaking, the right in this country, as the country has moved and shifted in a more progressive manner, have really become unhinged to the point of calling for violence. It's like a daily thing with them. That's kind of normal. It's par for the course. Now you look at countries where that kind of thing has happened, and generally speaking, the outcomes are never good long term. Stewart Rhodes, in November of 2020, after the election, goes on rants again about preparing for civil war. Now what's happened in 2020? We've got another first again. The first female vice president in this country's history is elected as vice president. And she happens to be a black woman or a woman of color and identifies that way. And so the election is illegitimate. It was stolen. There was rampant voter fraud. You see, there goes the delegitimizing and illegitimacy of another black candidate. This time the second highest office holder in this country. So he did it the first time with Barack Obama. And now this time with Kamala Harris. You're not starting to pick up what I'm putting down. You don't start to see the pattern. You're not connecting the dots yet. Come on now. I know some of you didn't graduate 8th grade. But this is kindergarten level connecting dots. So the election was stolen. And this lie, this one, they say it's the trial run. No, this is the run. This is not the trial. This is the run. This is all they have left, is to, well, state things, make claims that they can't substantiate. Now you know, anytime you make a claim, you have to be able to substantiate it. This is the only claim in the history of American democracy where one political party has continued to make a claim as though it was fact because they're making it. And when asked to provide substantiating proof of their claim, in more than a year have failed to do so. Now, they usually call that in the biz industry failure to launch. Nonsense. Rubbish. Bullshit. The whole entire political conservative movement in this country has chosen to continue stating a claim that they failed to substantiate. At least to me, I haven't seen any proof. You've got members of Congress who spoke in Arizona just over the past weekend, current members. Representative Paul Gosar got up to the podium and told thousands of citizens in this country that there was rampant fraud. You saw all the head twisting and neck turning. But yet, didn't provide any evidence. There was plenty of media out there. He could have given documents about all the fraudulent voters of Arizona who cast fraudulent ballots. You gotta have their names by now. They gotta actually be citizens in Arizona by the thousands who cast the fraudulent ballots. You gotta have all their names and addresses. You're a Congress member. You can figure that shit out. You know your districts well. There were district level candidates running for all kind of executive offices. They got up there and said, we all know that this election was rigged and stolen. We all know. As though get this one, as though you can make a claim and everybody that believes your claim and you speak amongst yourself and say that we all know that the claim we made is true. That's called confirmation bias, when you state something that you already believe as though it was proof of being truthful. Of course everybody there believes that. They believe it because you told them that. It's not like you provided proof of that though. There was urban fraud. Is now the new terminology. There was widespread urban fraud in 2020. Now, they haven't proved how there was widespread urban fraud. They just said it. You know, he gave a speech over the weekend in Arizona. You know, the same clown show, the loser in chief. And he went on about there being urban fraud and widespread voter fraud. He didn't say where or how it happened. And they started talking about absentee ballots and vote by mail, as though he didn't vote by mail himself and none of his family members did. He voted by mail in 2020. Okay, urban fraud. They didn't give any examples of the urban fraud. They talk about irregularities, but irregularities happen in everything. You go to turn on the light at your Starbucks location. It doesn't turn on Tuesday. You're like, what's happened? Oh, the lights blew out. You gotta change the light bulb. That's an irregularity. Oh, the machine is not working here in this district. Oh, that's proof of voter fraud. That machine should be working. You know, that machine should be working. How did the machine not work? You know, who programmed it? That's the bullshit that they want to do to you. They try to convince you that the election wasn't handled fairly. They provided no proof. Irregularities is what they said is proof. Although, you know that if there had been cases and examples of voter fraud in urban cities, they would have talked about them. I found it interesting that the president, the former president, the loser in chief, didn't mention anything about the voter fraud that has been discovered in the 2020 election. The tiny few cases that have been discovered. You know, like in the state of Florida, where he lives, in the Villages, which is heavily Trump country in Florida. There's been 4 people now federally indicted for voter fraud in 2020. Wouldn't you know, all 4 of them voted multiple times for Donald Trump in the Villages, a heavily conservative area of retirees. You remember the video that he shared right before the election of the old dude in the golf chair chanting white power? That's the Village community. 4 cases from that one area of voter fraud, all of them in favor of Donald Trump. And he didn't mention any of that shit in Arizona. But there's urban fraud. It sounds like to me, white conservatives love to project. You commit the voter fraud. We know it. You commit the voter forgery by forging documents and sending that to Michigan. Official government documents, forging the electors. Forgery, perjury, all kinds of state charges and federal charges. Sounds like it's projection. All the cases thus far have been voter fraud in favor of Donald Trump. And then you say, well, it's the counting process. They found more votes for Donald Trump when they did the recount in Georgia, the hand recount. So that's evidence of voter fraud, apparently, according to our conservative friends. The only problem with that is this. The 3,000 additional votes they found in Georgia for Donald Trump weren't found in any Democratic county. They were found in heavily conservative counties. They miscounted their own votes. But yet they want to blame the cities. Atlanta got their count correct only a couple of days after election because they took the time to properly count each and every vote in an urban large setting. It's the rural counties that don't even have that many people who had to have a recount well after the election to find magically 3,000 more votes for Donald Trump. Now can you imagine if Atlanta in that same time had found 15,000 more additional votes for Joe Biden? What those counties would be saying about DeKalb County and Fullerton County. But you didn't hear DeKalb and Fullerton County blame those smaller counties for finding those votes. So maybe you need new counters in the smaller rural areas because they can't seem to count the votes correctly and on time after the election. You'll never hear that from Stewart, Rhodes or your mainstream media. Urban fraud. Well, the Villages is not urban. It is kind of compact though. Now, not everybody in the Village is a nut. There's a lot of people in the Village that are with us, but it's a retiree community for mostly white people. You might have a few minority people who live in the Village. I've never been, but we've heard nice things about some of the people in there. A lot of the people, I'm sure, are no fans. I can only imagine. Now, we get to January 6th. It's certification day. It's a historic day in our country that we have a first female vice president. And you know what now? It's been tarnished and spoiled. You saw on the screen who was there. But you have members that want to whitewash what you saw in your own brain. Antifa or Black Lives Matter. Now wait a minute. You're telling me Antifa and Black Lives Matter spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on Trump paraphernalia. Did you see the sea of Trump 2020 flags and gear and paraphernalia? No. Believe you me, I know Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They don't buy that type of shit. You know, sometimes you just gotta take the L. You gotta wear the L with pride. You gotta take the L. That L, January 6th, that L is squarely on the white conservative movement in the United States of America. That's your L to take. Recently, I received a comment from an individual. I don't know who this individual was, but he was on this internet. And this individual said that they know many black supremacists. Went on a rant about trying to do that equivalency thing. Let me be clear. The Black Panther Party did not storm the nation's capital, nor have they ever stormed the nation's capital. No radical religious sect that's black has ever stormed the nation's capital. They've attended rallies and protests at the nation's capital, which is well within everyone's right as a citizen of this country to protest and redress your country. You don't have a right to break into the nation's Capitol building, destroy property of the nation's capital, defecate and spread feces on the floors and walls of the nation's Capitol building, and look to assassinate duly elected members of this nation. You don't have a right to do those things. That's not an assembly that's peaceful or law-abiding. So for individuals who say that they're for law and order, there was nothing lawful or orderly about January 6th. You can try to downplay it and try to minimize it, but that's your L, white conservative Americans in this country. You plied, you planned, you organized, and you orchestrated that bullshit. But it had nothing to do with race, apparently, according to the Oathkeepers. Because in their bylaws, they don't discriminate on the basis of race. You heard what I said about when Barack Obama got elected. And now you saw what they did when Kamala Harris got elected. So let's be honest and tell you what this is truly about. This is about a fear amongst white conservative Americans of black political power in this country. And they've tried 2 times now to delegitimize 2 duly elected black officers of this country. Stewart Rhodes is a racist and a white supremacist. He's the textbook Oxford University definition of what a white supremacist would look like. His fundamental belief, the motto of the Oathkeepers, is not on our watch. Now stop and think. I'm going to give you some time here to reflect on that. You now know that the motto is not on our watch. Now, that's very cryptic. You have to be a sleuth to understand what that means. Remember, I'm an owl, so I know what these cryptic things and terminologies they use mean. We use those things too. We all do. Not on our watch is the motto. What don't you want to happen whilst you're here? Change. You see, Barack Obama ran on hope and change, remember? Change we can believe in. They don't want change. They want it to remain the same for a little bit and then swing that thing backwards, as far back as you can go. Stewart Rhodes' fundamental principle, his philosophical belief system, is that he, as an American sovereign citizen, will not be allowed to be governed over by a black person in the United States of America. You know this is true. Oh no, not Stewart Rhodes and the Oathkeepers. They took an oath to defend and protect the Constitution as it was originally intended to be. You know, you hear them from time to time, the original intent crew. I believe in the original intent of the Constitution. You know what that means, right? The original intent. I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it. There were other documents here prior to the colonization of this hemisphere. Whether you agreed or disagreed with the structure of those documents, they were governing principles by which the people who resided here abided by. Now when you come and you take something, when you take over, generally you want to set your principles and guidelines. And that's what occurred in colonization. What I'm trying to get at is, you can't say the original intent of the nation, because the nation had bylaws and contracts prior to your colonization of the nation. So say you want to go back to your original intent, but not the nation's original intent. You'd have to go back to the indigenous principles in this nation, their bylaws. I don't think you want to go back to that. So say your original intent. The 1776 doctrine. But they would probably want to go back to 1619. Let's be honest about it. Stewart Rhodes is very sick and deeply unwell. And most of his members are too. He was big, huge news when the Department of Justice charged the Oathkeepers, Stewart Rhodes, the founder, and 10 of their members with seditious acts of treason against this government. I can guarantee you, every member that was charged, that tiny number of the thousands of members of Oathkeepers, that tiny number, every last one of them had law enforcement and probably military previous experience. You can't say you're for democracy when it works in your favor and you get the outcome that you want. And then you're not for democracy when you don't get the outcome that you want. Barack Obama gets elected, and it's time to prepare for war. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris get elected, and it's time to prepare for war and storm the nation's capital and attempt a coup against your own government. You know, you don't believe in democracy. You believe in, let's call it what you want, a white ethno state. Only white, conservative, heterosexual men shall govern over them. Anyone else is not qualified to govern. And not only are they not qualified to govern, they're illegitimate. If they get in charge of you, you don't have to obey their orders and commands. That's what he told his members. If you're in law enforcement and the military, you don't have to take the commander-in-chief's orders. They're not lawful. Where am I lying? I'm being precise, detailed, and as accurate as I fucking can be. Yeah, that's seditious. That's the textbook definition of sedition. You don't think you have to follow a command or order because it's coming from someone of color. Who the fuck does Stewart Rhodes think he is? What a traitorous son of a bitch. You know, as time went on, some of the people that originally signed up for the Oathkeepers, they left. They started to get the stench and the drift of what was really going on. They put 2 and 2 together. Because you got Stewart making comments like, we're going to set up IEDs. If you don't know what an IED is, it's an improvised explosive device. He's going to have his members set up IEDs in cities to kill people, political people that he disagrees with. people who served in Iraq and Afghanistan know what that shit is. They know if you start doing that shit in this country, it doesn't stop. It only escalates more and more and more. He's a domestic terrorist. We knew that a long time ago. From March of 2009 to 2022 of January, you've literally had some wackadoodle, nut, domestic terrorists advocate for civil war because they simply don't want to follow the edicts and dictates and commands of an African American citizen duly elected to our nation's highest offices in this land. I mean, that's a fact, Jack. Go and check the record. Where am I lying? They want to operate a white ethno state. That's what the voting legislation is in all of these 19 states in the South. That's what it's all about. They're trying to carve out minorities and young people from having a voice in a democracy because they simply are regressive, and they want their regressive ways to operate even if they know they're clearly not in the majority anymore in this country. They're gonna lie to themselves because they believe their own lies. Anybody with an IQ above room temperature knows that if you live in an urban setting, there's more people who tend to live in an urban setting. Therefore, there would be more votes from urban settings than a tiny rural or suburban area. This is simple and basic mathematics. But because they don't have the votes in the urban areas, they're just going to say, don't even count the votes there. They're not citizens there. We're the only American citizens. Don't you know? Our voice should be the only thing that gets heard. Be damned with those communists, socialists, radical black supremacists. You know, any old name to try to justify what they're trying to do, which is abolish democracy to set up a white ethno state. Stewart Rhodes would have been the military for that white ethno state. That's why they were very specific in who the members should be. First responders, EMT workers, nurses, doctors, sheriffs, police officers, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. I know. We all know what this was about. And sadly, we're not done. I think we're just at the very beginning of this. You know, the biggest fear is the fear of things changing. The thing that you knew being something that it no longer is. Some people can handle change kind of well. Some people don't handle change well at all. Can you imagine Stewart Rhodes growing up in this country, as racist as America was when he was growing up, and then to witness in his lifetime the first African American president of this country, and then not too long after that the first female African American president of this country. The time span of those things happening are narrowing. They can sense it, the urgency of this shadowy figure, the shadow growing larger in the distance. This is pure racism, unadulterated and pure hatred, and we all know it. We can sniff it out. I don't know how anybody in this country of color can justify feeling safe in this land when you know that upwards of 38,000 first responders, law enforcement officers, sheriffs, EMT workers, firefighters, nurses, doctors, legislators, all felt that same sentiment so strongly that they became members and took that oath, not on our watch. You know what else is watchful? An owl. An owl sits high atop a tree, perched, and it's just watchful. You don't think that I know what this is and what you're trying to do in this country. You know, it's going to be hard to put the genie back in the bottle in this country. And everybody knows that. There has to be accountability for the individuals that popped the cork on the genie bottle and knew that the genie was inside. They knew. They plotted a coup against this nation simply because they don't want to follow the edicts and the commands of African American citizens who attain political power. It's as simple as that. So Stewart had at least 19 members, heavily armed, outside the nation's capital on January 6th. Now you're thinking, why were they outside D.C.? A strike force response team. Why were they directly positioned outside D.C. and not inside the city near the capital? One one reason only. DC has laws against citizens coming into the jurisdiction with weapons. Now you think, DC is not a state, but why would it have jurisdictional laws about banning weaponry inside the Capitol or that general vicinity? Specifically because they knew that individuals like Stewart Rhodes exist in this country. But what they were going to do was cause so much confusion. You know, the individual planted pipe bombs at the DNC and RNC headquarters in DC, which was probably a decoy, a distraction that was going to quarter a lot of law enforcement into that area. Then you had the assault on the Capitol. And then if anyone was captured, so to speak, lawmakers, staffers, aides, media, the strike force was going to come into the city at night under the cover of nightfall and publicly execute these people and live stream it to the whole entire world. That was the plot, cooked up by people like Stewart Rhodes and white supremacists in this country. You're right, that's seditious. That's seditious treason. But you have a lot of the members still on law enforcement, active duty, still in military, still serving as EMT workers, still serving as nurses and doctors. You think I want those people near the general society and they feel that way about their own fellow citizens? No. In September of 2021, it was leaked, the membership list of a lot of people who were members of the Oathkeepers. At that time, it was said to be around 38,000. Anybody that was ever associated with the Oathkeepers is a threat domestically in this country. I hope people are aware of that, the severity and the gravity of that. They shouldn't be active duty in anything anymore. If you have their names, which certain individuals do, it's time to give them the boot. If they're not willing to respect edicts and commands based on the creed and race of individuals in this country who attain the highest office in this land, then they shouldn't be serving or protecting or doing anything over other fellow citizens. They've all committed sedition to their citizenry by taking an oath, another oath, an oath that only protects them and their kind and opposes everyone else. You can't have somebody like that over all of us. That's why you're seeing these police officers doing all of this shit. Because they're members of Oathkeepers. It's a gang. They get rewards for doing this shit. You all know who they are. Kick them off the forces. or else it's going to be a really rough 2022 for everybody in this country. No matter where you are on any social economic status, it's going to be a really rough year for you. There's too much information now to not take action. I know more than what I can possibly divulge or share on social media. The proper authorities have to take action. This cannot stand in this country. We know exactly what this is about in the end goal. The Oathkeepers. It's about time that was finally dealt with. Should have been dealt with a long time ago. Sometimes things take a long time to deal with. Fair enough. In 2022, this has to be dealt with. It cannot continue to go on. If it does, there's going to be grave consequences. And you think that, well, wait a minute, that sounds threatening. You have to look at the long-term things, the trajectory. It's not threatening to be a pragmatist and look at the overlay of the land, so to speak, and see what's brewing. They're literally trying to take people's right to vote away. Whilst they're saying integrity. We believe in election integrity. You think I'm going to listen to the same person who says they believe in election integrity, but was also on the telephone in December calling to the Secretary of State in Georgia, demanding that you fine him 11,000 more votes. You just fine him the votes. And that's the person I'm going to believe lecture me about election integrity? After you've lost the election, you'll demand that you are found the votes to just be declared the winner? Insanity. Integrity. They have no integrity. A liar has no integrity. And Donald Trump is a pathological liar. He made all kinds of outlandish claims. King Fauci. You really want to demonize the individual who you appointed as your chief czar of the task force. You really want to demonize that individual. You're the one that appointed him. Now he's trying to become the king. See, it's always the same show with that clown. Name calling and blaming. Look at what's happened to the country. Look at what's happened to the country. What's happened to the country was you got elected. And then we had to spend 4 years dealing with all kind of lunacy. You had in 2017 the Unite the Right, Charlottesville. You remember Charlottesville in 2017, where Proud Boys, Oathkeepers, you know, all the races, the 3%ers, the KKK, all types of different hate groups, Patriot Prayer, people that hate the LGBTQIA individuals, hate immigrants, hate Muslims, they all got together in Charlottesville, in a college town in Virginia. All the anti-Semitic individuals, all the racist Nazis, and they were marching. You remember the tiki torches. That's the Oathkeepers. That's the Proud Boys. That's who those people were. That's who they still are. They want to say it's not about race. Yes, it is. It always has been, and it always will be. They don't want to be governed over, and they don't feel like they have to be governed over anyone that's not from their kind, their tribe, their ideology. If democracy produces someone from their tribe, the winner, then oh my goodness, it's a triumph. It's a victory. We're great again. But if democracy produces someone not from their tribe, it's illegitimate. It's rampant fraud. There's shadowy figures in the background dictating things. You get my point? What a bunch of sore losers. Is there such thing as losing gracefully? White conservative Christians in this country have never lost graciously. When they don't get their way, they always turn violent. We know this. This is nothing new. Check the records. They did the same thing in Rome, in Greece, in Athens. Anytime they didn't get their way, they resort to violence. That's a long story tradition of theirs. That's why you have organizations, entities, groups like Antifa, which stands for anti-fascist. Because history has shown us time and time again, whenever certain tribal groups don't get their way, they turn and resort to violence to try to intimidate their way into power. That bullshit won't work in this country. One, we've dealt with it before. We've dealt with white terrorism before in this country. Let's call it what it is. Segregationists. Bull Connor. Jefferson Davis. Strom Thurmond. Robert Byrd. We've dealt with white terrorism. The Ku Klux Klan. The Branch Davidians. We've dealt with this before. We know what it's like. The ebbs and the flows of it. But what we never dealt with is an organization that actually plotted to overthrow the government simply because they don't like democracy anymore. And that organization is the Oathkeepers. And their motto is not on our watch. You know what that means now, or you should by now. No black, indigenous, person of color will ever give them edicts or commands not on their watch. Well, I like to tell you, Oathkeepers, 2022 and beyond, your watch ends. Your watch is over in this country. I know you're not going to take that news very well, but it's a clear-cut basis in reality. You know, when people discovered the world wasn't flat, indeed it was round, it was very difficult. There was upheaval in the land due to this realization. Nowadays you can find videos on YouTube of flat earthers giving you mathematical reasons as to why the planet is still flat. But you don't see the upheaval that you saw at the very beginning of that ideology being shattered into a gazillion pieces. At the very beginning of something happening, you have the most instability, the most angst, the most anxiety, the most rage, the most hatred. The venom is still seeping through the veins. The wound is still raw. With time, things adjust and change. You can't say that you're for democracy when it benefits you, and then you're against democracy when it still benefits you, but it benefits everyone else too. That's not how democracy works. And if you don't want to participate anymore, you're well within your right to not participate. However, what you're not within your right to do is to not only not participate anymore, but try to thwart the whole process from ever occurring because you didn't get your way. That's Stewart Rhodes. That's Donald Trump. That's the MAGA crew. That's Madison Cawthorn. That's Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's Lauren Boebert. That's Josh Hawley. That's Ron DeSantis. That's Ted Cruz. That's Tom Cotton. That's the modern day Republican Party, who just recently decided that they don't even want to participate in the presidential commission debates anymore. If they don't have it their way, then it's the highway. That's their democratic principles at this point. There was a special election in Florida. The first ever Haitian American immigrant has been elected to the House of Representatives. Her Republican challenger didn't get 20% of the vote in that district during this recent special election, yet has failed to concede and said that his opponent, who won by a landslide, he said that she won, so they say. And apparently he's thinking that there was rampant fraud. Now, if somebody wins by 60 percentage points and you don't even crack 20 percentage points in a congressional district, and you don't feel like you have to concede anymore, why are we going to pretend or play this game like the conservative movement the Republican Party believes in democratic and free and fair elections. They clearly don't. 100 of them plotted a coup to not certify the clear winner of the presidency in 2020. 100 congressional serving active Republican members of Congress. Can you imagine why Stewart Rhodes would plot all of this out the way he did when you have 100 congressional Republican elected members plotting with you? You know, this is not going to get real on the legislative level until Congress members are indicted for seditious treason, which I think is very near and approaching. You got to look at people like Jim Banks in Indiana and Jim Jordan in Ohio, Madison Cawthorn in North Carolina, Lauren Boebert in Colorado, Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia, Mo Brooks in Alabama, Senator. You gotta look at people like that and say, this is only gonna get real when the political class is hit with charges for what they did, what they were responsible for. Because sadly enough, you have members of this current Congress, Paul Gosar in Arizona, members who plotted with the insurrectionists. The government can't just say, we're going to go after the militia people, Stewart Rhodes, and then turn a blind eye to what the political class did to try to destabilize their own political process. It's insanity that Madison Cawthorn in North Carolina goes on about how there was rampant fraud. Yet, you, sir, took an oath, elected in the same year that Donald Trump was defeated. If you had any principle, you would have resigned by now and said, I wasn't elected as Congress member, because there's no way that a fraudulent election where there's rampant voter fraud in every state in the union could have elected me and not elected Donald Trump. It doesn't make any sense. So Lauren Boebert, all of them would have had to have left, never taken the oath. The election is illegitimate. How can you say the election of 2020 is an illegitimate election when you got elected in 2020 and you're standing there drawing a paycheck from the same government you're saying is illegitimate? We're paying your salary to tell us bullshit. No, this gets real when the political class is indicted for what they did too. The business class has to be hit too for funding this shit. There's got to be accountability for everybody. You can't just go after the fringe and the extremists, which really do need to be curtailed. Because that's who hits us the most out in the streets. Those psychos. We're not going to run into the business racists who funded J6. We're not going to run into them. They're not going to be the ones that are directly going to be our perpetrators. It's going to be Stewart Rhodes and his crew. But they give money to continue having Stewart Rhodes and people like him exist. So they bear accountability in this too. It's a good start, but the political class is next. There should be indictments for what they did. That was seditious against their own government. And then they say, oh, well, it was just for political theatrics. Not if you plotted and planned with the insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol. Political theatrics is getting up on the House floor and Senate floor and making fiery speeches, sharing where you stand on an issue. Political rhetoric is not coordinating with people who are attacking the building you work out of, that we as citizens pay you to go and work out of, I might add. That's not political theatrics. That's being an accomplice to sedition. That's what they should charge these members with. I'm telling you, that's coming very, very soon. It has to. It has to. There's no other way around it. Stewart Rhodes didn't operate in a vacuum. Mike Lindell wasn't operating in a vacuum. The Proud Boys weren't operating in a vacuum. There was intense coordination between a lot of individuals to perpetrate the attack on the nation's Capitol building on January 6th. To stop the certification. Let me repeat that. To stop the certification of the first female vice president in this country's history. I don't think we can even understand the magnitude of all of this. It's serious. You know something's afoot when all the political class is talking about democracy. And ladies and gentlemen and non-binaries, something is afoot and it's serious.